inevitable. At some point in your career, whether you be cash-based or insurance-based, your patients are going to ask for access to their files, access to their charts, if you don't already give it to them automatically. And I see a lot of you guys have a lot of uncertainty surrounding how to navigate when your patient requests access to their chart. You also seem to not necessarily know what you have to give them access to and what you actually don't need to give them access to. So, in today's video, I'm going to dive deep into what exactly you need to do and why when a patient asks for you for access to their chart. So, the big question is, do you have to give them access to everything in their chart? And the truth is, you don't. When a client wants their records, what the HIPAA rule actually says is you do not need to give them access to everything in their chart. You just need to give them access to things that you use to make decisions about their care. And so under HIPAA, what actually is required is what they refer to as a designated set, which we're going to talk about. And so, under HIPAA privacy rule, clients and their legal representatives, so if they have like a power of attorney, they have a right to inspect and obtain their records. I know it feels weird when people want their records, but the reality is legally they have access to them. So anything you used as a registered dietitian to make decisions about their care, they have legal access to. And you have to provide those records within 30 days of their request. However, if you're like traveling or something crazy happens, you actually can get an extension to provide their documentation. So don't freak out if something happens and your life is chaotic. Generally, you just want to give them like a written notice explaining why. So couple things. Clients can request a paper version or an electronic version, depending upon what is feasible for your practice. And no, like I said, you cannot deny access to their chart just because you're worried they might disagree with your notes or probably more likely misinterpret your recommendation. So what counts as a designated record set? So here's what most dietitians get tripped up on. Not everything in your EMR is actually considered part of a designated record set. So things you would be required to share from a documentation standpoint is anything that informs decisions about the client's care, such as, let's go through a whole list. So initial and follow-up notes, we would provide nutrition assessments, any type of care plans, any goals. A lot of times those are in the follow-up and initial notes, any type of correspondence, so coordination of care, especially important if you're working with eating disorders, like who are you talking to, who are you having conferences with regarding the care of this particular patient, lab interpretations or summaries in your recs. A lot of times, once again, those are in your initial and follow-up notes. And then any progress tracking, once again, SMART goal documentation. Once again, those things tend to be already in the patient's file. What you do not need to provide them with, any administrative paperwork. So if you're like my practice, you have them fill out a whole novel relative to what they need to give you before their visits, any personal reminders or drafts that are intended solely for your use. So like, for example, for me, like I may take notes as I'm going, but I might use an AI charting as well. So like my actual little notes do not need to be shared. And then anything that was copyright or generic relative to educational information, though you can show them in full transparency, you do not need to give them. This distinction is actually really important when handling MNT insurance denials, because if a payer ever audits your documentation or a client requests after a denied claim, you want to make sure that your designated record set is clear, is compliant, and professional. So those are the things that they have access to, as well as the things that you do not need to provide them. How about educational or handout material? Like as dietitians, like that is our love language, right? Is like educational handouts and PDFs. So if the handouts you guys provided to your patients are directly related to their plan of care and they're customized, maybe you gave them a custom carb counting guide, a customized meal plan, it's probably good practice to actually use them in the record release. However, HIPAA does not actually require you release those. Generic material like a high fiber food list or like on my plate doesn't count as part of the legal record. That being said, many dietitians like myself would include those as context or just a gesture of goodwill. An important piece. And I don't think most dietitians know this, but you can actually charge, obviously not like a shit ton of money, you're not going to get rich, but you can charge within reason for the record request. HIPAA allows you to charge a cost share based on what your actual expense is in preparing them. So what goes into preparing them, right? It could be like copying or scanning them. If you have to mail them or probably FedEx them, the postage would be included, as well as like the cost of a USB or a CD. I've only seen, I think, one CD of patients' records. Mostly everything is electronic, but maybe you put everything, maybe they had a shit ton of notes, and so you put them on a USB. Anyway, those costs would be covered in terms of that. And then what's not allowed to pass on to the patient, like the retrieval cost, the review, or any type of administrative fees. So most dietitians generally charge between, I don't know, $10 and $30 for lengthy or complex records, although some may just waive the fee for electronic copies or just short records. So that's really got on you guys relative to do you want to charge them for it? Many dietitians do. Once again, it's probably going to be determined by like how complex the patient's record is and like how many times you've seen them. So I want to give you, because I want you guys to rock this like the bosses that you are. How do you handle record requests like a pro? So I'm going to give you guys my five-step framework on how we move through them. And so that way, if they're linked to insurance denials or disputed claims, you guys have a very clear process for how to proceed. So number one, you always want to have a written policy in your HIPAA notice of privacy practices. If you don't have, those are pretty easy to get access to, like, what your notice of privacy practices have to include. But I actually have a starter pack on reimbursementdietitian.com in the store if you need access to any of the, like, kind of the forms. So you want to have a written policy, number one. Number two, you want to use a formal record request form noting the date, the scope, and then the format in terms of which you are going to be sharing those legal documents with. And then obviously you want to redact any third-party identifiers. So for example, if your notes mention a family member or another client, right? Obviously we do not want that information. We want to make sure that's redacted. Deliver them securely, right? So it either needs to be through encrypted email, patient portal, or secure mail, right? We are not going to just put these documents in regular mail. We would probably send them, if we were going to send them to the patient, we would send them certified required and through signature required and through certification mail. And then keep documentation of what was sent and when, right? So keep like kind of the exact same file that you're giving them, give them a copy as well, and then just make notes. I'm a little neurotic. Like I will often print out those things and keep them in a folder. I know that it is 2025 and people don't do that, but Amy P does that. So just that's my kind of five-step process. So have a written policy in place, use a formal record request form, redact any identifiers that might be, mention people that should not be mentioned, deliver a record securely, and then obviously keep documentation. And more importantly, HIPAA sets the baseline, but if you're in a state, some states require you to actually fulfill a document request faster. So sometimes it's within 15 days. So always just check your state health records in terms of how to stay compliant, but most of them are 15 to 30 days. And once again, if you need an extension, it is totally within legal bounds to request that of your patient. Just make sure you share it to them in writing. So what is the bottom line here? What do you guys need to take away from this video? So when clients request their records, it's not a personal matter. It's actually their right. So as a provider, you have a responsibility to handle the request professionally, confidently, and in accordance with your state laws. Your record keeping comes into play when there's an insurance denial, if there is a trial, If you just need to be compliant in terms of documentation, obviously it's going to protect your practice as well as your reputation. And HIPAA isn't here to trip you up. It's actually here to remind you that good documentation is actually good business. So, what do they have access to? All of those things that we noted today in the record set. What is the time frame? Usually 15 to 30 days. And we just have to make sure that we are giving it to them in a secure fashion. Once again, do not send any paperwork just via normal mail. So I have lots of videos on documentation on Reimbursement Dietitian. I have a really good masterclass on navigating audits. So if you are not familiar with what is required in terms of documentation, what is required in an audit, go over to Reimbursement Dietitian, go over to the store, and then you guys will see I have master classes. And in those master classes, I actually show you actual audits and actual notes from my team in terms of compliance with all of that information. So I just thought this video it would be helpful because I've seen this question come up a ton and it seems to be kind of top of mind. So hopefully you guys found this helpful. If you did, hit the subscribe button. We release videos just like this every single week. And I do my best to really address topics that you guys are struggling with, not necessarily ones that I want to talk about, but ones that are keeping you guys up. And I always want to do my best as a business coach, as your mentor, as your colleague to give you accurate information. So for now, Amy P, Reimbursement Dietitian, always here to simplify the reimbursement process for registered dietitians and CNSs accepting insurance. And I'll see you guys next week. Peace.